Welcome to Assess Your Assets, Determine Your Direction to Jumpstart Your Job Search, and I am Susan Whitcomb, your MBA Career Strategist for this call. People enter business school for a variety of reasons. Some are quite clear on what they want to do when they complete. Some have just a general idea about joining the professional or management ranks, but perhaps haven't had yet the time to think through distinctly what it is that they want. Fortunately, the MBA degree is a broad degree and it leaves open a lot of options, and that's a good thing, but it can also, on the other hand, be a bit of a detriment if there are too many options in front of you and you haven't yet had a chance to narrow down what those options will be. Whether you're a first-year student looking to get clear on where you want to spend your summer internship, or you're ready to graduate, or you may be in a professional program or even a part-time evening weekend program, this step of assessing your assets and getting clear on your direction is really relevant and important. Employers expect every job seeker, and especially MBAs, to know what it is that they want to do, to know what their strengths are, to know where they would fit into the organization. They want you basically to treat your career like you would run your own business. And if you were running your own business, you would know what your products and services are. You'd know what your features and benefits are for those products and services. You'd know your competitive advantage. You'd know your competitors. You'd know your brand for your products and a number of other things. And so the same holds true managing your career. It's important that you know what your assets are, what your strengths are, what your return on investment is, what your personal brand is, etc. And the more clearly you can articulate that to hiring managers, the more you're going to stand out over the dozens of others who come from, say, prestigious schools with a high GPA and a list of accolades a yard long. I was working recently with a district sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, and she had a stellar background, had ranked in the top 5 to 10% nationwide for years, and she was interviewing with a new company, with a regional manager for a new pharma company, and that manager told her that she had some amazing candidates and all with backgrounds similar to my clients. And that regional manager said that I am picking from the cream of the crop, so it's really going to come down to the right fit. It's going to come down to the right fit. That's what employers are looking for these days. So when you go through this process of assessing your assets, you're going to be able to target companies that will be the right fit, and you'll have a shorter search in the process. And a shorter search can mean an extra $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 or more in your pocket, since you'll be employed faster than your competition. So let's get started. And the agenda for today is a 3-part agenda. We're going to look at assessment strategy first, and then by the conclusion of this session, you'll have a fairly clear picture of the position and industry focus, and then you'll be able to do some preliminary due diligence to test that position and industry focus. To do that, we're going to look at a model called the Master Fit, and the Master Fit has dual meanings, FIT on the external side and FIT on the internal side. And so I'll explain what I mean by that external and internal here in just a second. The external side has to do with what the employer is looking for. And specifically, they want to know what the focus is of your career. Do you know what your position is that you're looking for in the industry? They also want to know about identity. They want to know that their ideal for a particular candidate in that position, in that industry, matches what you have to offer in your personal brand. And then the third element in the FIT on the external side is your treasure, and that's what we call your value proposition, your ability to describe to that employer how you're going to help make them money. We'll go and talk about the internal master fit a little bit later in the second session. So today we want to focus just on that first element, that focus piece, the position and industry, because that's really what we call the table stakes in terms of getting into to talk with employers. And of course, table stakes refers to that minimum entry requirement for a market or a business arrangement to have a competitive standing or a competitive starting position. In the job search, the table stakes are the first 2 subsets of focus, which is the position and the industry. So let's talk about how to focus in on that position or industry. here is a list of a number of different types of positions that many MBAs might be interested in. And you can see everything from asset manager to consultant to corporate finance to institutional sales, marketing director, not-for-profit executive. So there are a number of positions listed here. And that's just sometimes a good starting point to think about what position am I interested in. I'd like to talk for just a minute about the difference between interests and abilities. It's helpful to start with interests. Of course, you do also have to have the abilities in that process. But the reason that we start with interests is that interests tie to engagement. And so what's important about engagement? Well, the Gallup organization estimates that the cost of disengagement within the U.S. workforce is more than $300 billion a year in lost productivity. So you can increase your abilities more easily than you can increase your interests. Now, abilities isn't the only measure because you can have an ability in an area, but you can also be burned out in that area. For instance, I'm thinking of a client who had his PhD in chemistry. He worked in the specialty chemicals fermentation products industry, and he wanted to cross over from the technical side of the house to the strategy side of the house, and so he went back to get his executive MBA. He was an excellent chemist, so he had all of the abilities in the world to be a good chemist, but that was a burnout skill. So you may be a fantastic, say, technical person or programmer, but now you're interested in evaluating technology companies for mergers and acquisitions. So making sure that you've got the interest is essential. Ability is also important. Abilities, again, can be beefed up. Interests are hard to pump up. So you've got to have the interest first. So that's why we focus on the interest. So let's look at some clues that will help you to know what position and industry focus you'd like to be looking into. So your initial motivation to go to business school is oftentimes a good clue. Another clue would be classes that you gravitate towards or topics that you gravitate towards. So think about what these might be for yourself. Are they marketing classes? Are they finance classes? Do they have to do with consulting? Do they have to do with investment banking, etc.? Another clue would be your past work successes. Car stories are a great way to identify what those successes are. That would be where you think about some challenges that you've had in the past and the action that you took to meet those challenges, and then the tangible that came as a result of that. So that can give you some ideas about things that you might be good at doing, your abilities. Another clue would be your fascinations. What do you love to read? What websites fascinate you? What activities do you find that you lose track of time with? Sometimes thinking about people that you admire, people that you enjoy being with, or even people that you envy, that can give you a clue as to what position you might want to be focusing on. And then don't discount encouragement from people close to you. I call these people your bone marrow people, and that might be a partner or a spouse or a significant other or a family member or a close friend. So these are people that would just, as they hear you say, yeah, I've always really been interested in investment banking, and they might say you'd be a perfect fit or you'd be a natural, or I am not surprised to hear that. So don't discount that information as well. Sometimes that emotional connection that you have with people where you just click, and to click with people that you've been in at professional association meetings, or maybe there are industry clubs on campus that you've been involved with. Maybe you've done a trek and you just really kind of had a great connection there with people on that. Another clue can be job postings. So actually looking at some job postings that you think might interest you, and if you get what I call that tingle factor coming over you, where you just get goosebumps and you think, wow, that just sounds perfect. I would love to do something like that. Pay attention to that as well. And there are some resources listed on the slide here, Indeed.com, SimplyHire.com. Those are two big aggregator sites where you can find a number of different job postings for different positions and industries. And then, of course, assessments. Assessments can be a great resource to be able to get feedback and get some clues about the direction that you might want to go. Many times people ask me, is there a silver bullet for choosing a position? Well, assessments are sometimes a good place to start. However, there are some pros and cons to them. So let's look at the pros and cons here briefly. Some of the pros are that they're a great starting point, and they can confirm your strengths and your interests, and they can increase some of the options that perhaps you hadn't thought of previously. There are also some cons to doing assessments. Even though it can increase your options, at the same time it might limit your options. It might close off things that you might have discovered by going out and doing some field research. And I like to say that the menu is not the meal. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You can look at a menu, you can look at some great descriptions, but it pales in comparison to actually consuming that meal. So you do need to get out and do some taste testing and do some market research to really check and make sure that it is going to be what you expect it to be. So in reality, there is no perfect silver bullet. And nonetheless, if you want to do some assessments, there are some good ones that are on the market. The Career Leader is often available through your university career center, so check with them about that. And it will generate for you a list of options that are either going to be a high match or a very high match. And here's just a quick screenshot of my results from my Career Leader. And I was really amazed at how closely it came up with ideas that would be relevant for my skill set and my interests. Another tool is the Strengths Finder. This is a book that's been used in a number of MBA schools. So the Strengths Finder 2.0, that assessment is available in the book Strengths Finder 2.0 by Tom Rath, and you can get that at any bookstore or on Amazon or any online bookstore. And then the 360 Reach Personal Branding Assessment is a great tool to get some input on your personal brand. So look for those resources at the Beyond B School site as well. And now let's take an action step around these position options. So I gave you a number of clues that might give you some ideas about position options. There's a list of actual positions as a starting point that floated by earlier. And then there might be some other places that you've been looking. And so it's good just to jot down right now 2 or 3 top-of-mind position options. You may want to consider reviewing assessment results that you've taken already, or perhaps taking some new assessments. But whatever it takes to be able to get at least 2 or 3 ideas down that are top of mind. So after you write those down, we'll move on. And keep in mind that you can add to this list as you go out and do some market research and talk to people. But for right now, again, we just want some top-of-mind ideas. Next is the industry focus. So remember, we've just talked about the position focus. That's the what you'll do, and then we talk about where you're going to do it. So what's the industry in which you want to do that? And here's a list of industries that MBAs may gravitate towards. So everything from consulting to consumer packaged goods to government, healthcare, hospitality, investment banking, to oil and gas, real estate, social media, technology. And again, this list obviously is not all-inclusive. There may be other industries that you're interested in. And there's no hard and fast rule that says you have to choose your position first and then your industry. Some people may be more interested in choosing their industry first and having that be the centerpiece of what they want to do, and then from there figuring out some positions that would fit within that industry. Let's talk a minute about the switch, the change that you might make from what it is you're doing now to where you want to be in the next few years. Now, in a job search, there are what I call 4 different quadrants that you might fit into as you're thinking about changing industries or changing jobs. On this slide, the first one in the green background has to do with the least challenging. I call that the smooth move career enhancers. So these are people that already have functional skills in the position, and they also have industry experience. And now they're just looking to move up the corporate ladder in that same functional realm, in that same industry. those people usually are going to have an advantage over somebody who might be, say, in quadrant 2, 3, or 4. And quadrant 2 and 3 is where you've got someone who has either functional skills or industry experience, but not both. I call those single switchers, whether single switching for industry or single switching for the functional position. So that can be moderately to very challenging in terms of that change. And then the fourth quadrant is extremely challenging in terms of a job search. Those are what I call the double switchers. They're switching both function and industry at the same time. Now, it's not to say that you can't do a double switch or even a single switch. There are some strategies that you can apply to be able to make that possible. Yet it is something to take into consideration and be aware of as you're thinking about the position and the industry that you're going to be targeting. So depending on how much time you have for your job search, you may go ahead and tackle something that's more challenging. If you're on a short runway, you may want to look at something that's less challenging and then figure out how to make it an entry point or how to make it a bridge job to the piece or to the position that you ultimately want to hold. Our next action step involves doing a list of industry options. So you've already written down a few position options. Now add 2 to 3 or 4 at the most top-of-mind industry options that are interesting you. And then once you do that, we're going to do some mixing and matching of that position and industry option. This next slide shows 3 different MBA students who have listed their 3 options. So Chris at the top has a private equity position in finance, or securities research in finance, or consulting in the oil and gas industry. Joan has listed corporate social responsibility in the consumer packaged goods industry, or a marketing position in the CPG industry, or a marketing position in the fashion industry. And then Jordan has a couple of other mix and match options as well. Now, what you'll do with those options is do some initial screening, sort of testing your concept in a preliminary due diligence fashion. So how do you do that? Well, there are some resources that you can start with, and the Beyond B School resources are available to you to do some initial research. You may do some online research outside of the Beyond B School website. You may want to take assessments, as we've talked about already, or revisit assessments. You may want to look at some job postings. We talked about a couple of websites that are good to do that. I recommend that people do some research on their LinkedIn competitors. Those would be people that are in a position and industry that you're already interested in, and just kind of take a look at where they came from and how they came up through the ranks. That can sometimes give you some interesting ideas. And then people research. So let's go to the next slide for people research. Now, people research has to do with talking to people, and I like to think about talking to what I call the safe people as you start in this preliminary due diligence process. Later in your job search, it will be important to get out and talk to actual target companies and alumni at companies that you're interested in. To begin with, as you're testing your initial concept of that mix and match position in industry, you'll want to check with people like career coaches at your university career center, or second-year students if you're a first-year student, or mentors if you're a second-year student, or perhaps maybe even some professors in some of your favorite classes that you've worked with. Certainly people within professional associations or industry clubs that you've been involved with on campus. Those would be great places to start that process. And then the question is, what do you want to ask them? Here on this next slide, I've got a couple of ideas for questions that you might use as a springboard to have some conversation around testing this position and industry focus. So the first question, I'm fascinated by the fill-in-the-blank industry and considering positions as, and then fill in the blank. Second statement, thus far I've done XYZ to research this. So it's important that you let people know that you've done a little research and they'll take you more seriously because of that. Then you can ask what other strategies would enable me to determine if this is the right fit. So that's a very proactive stance. The third question, you would say, I'm interested in this because, and then fill in the blank. So hopefully that's going to be something that shows that you've got some ability in that area, some track record of contributing in a similar fashion. And then you want to ask them, based on what you know about me, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is going to be high, how well suited might I be for this? And you can tell them, feel free to be very blunt, very, very plain, knowing that if they rate you a 5, you can then figure out, how do I move to a 6 and a 7 and an 8 and a 9 and a 10? How do I bump that score up? And then the fourth question, what advice would you offer for me to gain experience, shore up any gaps, make connections, move ahead? So those are 4 good questions just to start that process. And then you may want to build a spreadsheet of some sort that allows you to gather information in that due diligence process. Again, this initial due diligence. And so this particular spreadsheet shows the column headings of question number 1, question number 2, question number 3, and number 4. Those tie back to the 4 questions that we covered in that last slide. And then you would want to interview in the second years career coaches, peers, mentors, alumni, friends, professors, etc. So think about who you would want to go out and do this interactive field research with. And then once you've done that, think about going through this checklist that is floating by here at the moment, and it's also part of your handout. And there are 18 different items on this checklist, and I would say that if you can check off a dozen or more, that you've probably got a fairly good start on clarity about your position and your industry. And once you've got a clear direction, you've got energy, you've got momentum, and that momentum is priceless, which creates a connection with the employer and your networking contacts. And just like in a social relationship, if there isn't a connection, it's dead and it's not going anywhere. So that increases the depth of your relationship and your trust with people when there's that connection. You know, people do not hire automatons. They hire people they know, like, and trust, which gives you the opportunity to learn more and share your value and really be a great candidate in the process. So tackle your initial due diligence with your focus group contacts, gather that information, and then come back for the remainder of the master fit elements, which we'll cover quickly in the next short session. And in the words of coaching basketball great John Wooden, failing to prepare is like preparing to fail. So I look forward to seeing you find momentum as you prepare in this process. To your success, see you in the next session.